I wasn't expecting the email. Not this year, not after a decade of being quietly left out like a shadow in family photos. The Ellis family gathering subject line, cheerful, bold, and meant for everyone but me. I read the guest list, each name a tiny echo. My brother Evan, his new wife, my sister Grace, with her twin girls, Uncle Lou from Maine, even my childhood neighbor Mr. Bradley, but not Nora. Not even a misspelled version, not so much as a line break, where I might have been. 10 years is a long time to be invisible. Some kinds of exclusion are loud. A slammed door, a raised voice. But this one hums soft and steady, like the background noise of a refrigerator you only notice when the power goes out. I sat in my kitchen in Seattle sunlight, spilling over a stack of unpaid bills, my phone buzzing with work deadlines. I had built a life out here far from Willow Lake and childhood summers. Yet as I stared at the empty space where my name should have been, the house felt colder than winter in Maine. If you've ever felt like the missing piece in your own family story, this video is for you. Maybe you were the quiet one, the fixer, the peacekeeper, or simply the one who didn't fit the mold. Maybe like me, you did all the right things, showed up for birthdays, sent holiday cards, helped when no one else would, only to realize that being useful is never the same as being wanted. I want to share what happens when you finally stop waiting for an invitation and decide to write your own. In the next half hour, I'll take you through my journey of heartbreak discovery and fighting for something that mattered more than any grudge. This isn't just a story about lost invitations or old beach houses. It's about claiming your place in the world even when others have tried to erase you from the story. It's about finding the courage to speak up, to heal, and to believe that home can be something you build for yourself. So if you've ever been written out, overlooked, or made to feel small, stay with me. You are not alone. By the end of this video, you'll see why every silence has an ending and why the story isn't over until you decide what it means for you. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, have you ever felt erased from your own family's story? Leave a comment or just a single word below. Sometimes it's the quiet voices that need to be heard the most. Now let me take you back to the house on Willow Shore, to the memory that started it all. The house on Willow Shore wasn't just a building. It was summer thunderstorms thumping on the tin roof, fireflies caught in glass jars, and the echo of my father's laughter rolling through the hallways. When I stumbled on the real estate listing that afternoon, it felt like finding an old diary tossed in the trash. The photos showed peeling white paint, wild grass, climbing the porch steps, and a swing where I once read books for hours. But it was the motivated seller note that caught in my throat, a silent, practical goodbye to a place full of our messy, precious memories. Family homes like that are a different kind of inheritance. In America, a house often stands for more than just bricks and lumber, its tradition, identity, the backdrop to every family legend. I remember neighbors on Willow Shore Road fighting for years over an old maple tree in their front yard. When it was finally cut down, both families stopped speaking. My friend Jamie once told me how her grandmother's farmhouse sold after a heated argument left her parents scattered across states, each carrying a piece of the loss. Sometimes it's not the value of the house, but the stories that live inside it. But these places are also battlegrounds. It's where alliances form and break, old wounds resurface, and every unspoken grudge finds a voice. I scrolled through old photos, my brother and sister huddled around a campfire, Mom posing on the porch in her favorite red sweater, my own handwriting scrawled on the wooden banister upstairs. The thought of strangers walking those floors, making coffee in our chipped mugs, stung sharper than I expected. It wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about loyalty. Whose memory counted? Who got to decide what was worth keeping? Looking back, I realize how many American families go through the same heartbreak. I read once that almost 70% of family feuds are over property, not personality. Houses become stand-ins for love, acceptance, and sometimes power. If you're not careful, you can end up fighting for walls and windows when what you really want is to belong. It's an easy trap, thinking a house will fix old wounds or bring people back together. The lesson, I think, is that a home can hold memories, but it can't heal what's broken between people. As I stared at that listing, I didn't know whether to grieve, to laugh, or to get angry. All I knew was that the house on Willow Shore was the last place I saw my family together. Happy, if only for a moment. The realization made my heart ache and my mind spin with questions. What would happen if I let it go? What would happen if I didn't? That's when I started looking back at my role in the family, wondering how I'd become both invisible and indispensable at the same time. Growing up as the youngest meant living in the soft shadows of bigger stories. My brother Evan was the golden child, always first in line, first to be trusted. My sister Grace was the peacemaker, the one who organized every holiday meal, her voice louder and brighter than mine could ever be. I became the helper, the one who stayed quiet and picked up the pieces when tempers flared or things fell through. It's funny sometimes being useful becomes your entire identity. You learn to be invisible to blend in to smooth things overall, while quietly wishing someone would notice you anyway. There's a term for this in family psychology, the fixer, the overlooked child, the one who's always expected to pitch in, but rarely included in big decisions. It's a role many Americans know well, especially in big, bustling families. My friend Dana once told me she was the glue in her house, the person who remembered birthdays and bridged arguments, but who somehow never got the front seat on family road trips. She said she realized after years of trying to please everyone that being indispensable didn't mean she was truly valued. It just meant the work wouldn't get done without her. In my own family, I saw the pattern play out over and over. I was the one who booked Mom's doctor appointments, who sent Christmas cards when Grace forgot, who flew home alone to sit with Dad after his knee surgery. Nobody asked me to, no one really noticed when I did. But there was an unspoken agreement that I would show up quietly and reliably. That's how the youngest so often becomes essential, without ever really being seen. The spotlight is always somewhere else, and your reward is a seat just off stage, where applause never quite reaches. Looking back, I wonder how many of us drift into this role without ever meaning to. Maybe it starts with one small favor, a ride, a loan, a promise to keep peace, and then becomes a pattern that's hard to break. I think of neighbors and friends, women and men who grew up believing their value is measured by how useful they could be. The problem is, if you don't set boundaries, usefulness can start to feel like invisibility. You risk giving away all your energy, only to realize there's nothing left for yourself. The lesson I've learned is that love and obligation aren't the same thing. It's a hard truth, but an important one. You can be the one who shows up, who fixes, who mends, but if you never draw a line, people will keep writing you out of their big moments. Sometimes the bravest thing is to say no, to claim space, to remind others and yourself that you're not just background support. As I sat with these memories, thinking about the house on Willow Shore and the patterns I'd fallen into, a new determination began to form. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Maybe for once I needed to look past the surface and ask what had really been happening behind the scenes. That thought sent me searching into old files, legal papers, and the secrets my family had quietly kept. Curiosity and quiet worry led me to the old lockbox in the corner of my closet, a battered tin thing that still rattled with keys, receipts, and yellowed documents. My family had always believed in paperwork. Dad once said a signature was more lasting than a promise, and so the attic in Willowshore had always been stuffed with folders and forms. As I sifted through files, I realized how much of a family's story is written not in letters or photo albums, but in legal records and names typed in small official fonts. Sometimes what's left unsaid hides in plain sight. What started as an afternoon's distraction soon became something else. Flipping through house deeds, insurance letters, and wills, I noticed details that didn't match the stories I'd always been told. The owner's name had quietly shifted from my mother's to something called Willow Shore Holdings, LLC. Phone calls to county offices and long-forgotten family friends confirmed it. The house had changed hands in a way that left me off the paper trail entirely. I remembered stories from neighbors, how their own family homes disappeared, signed away in a lawyer's office. No goodbyes, just paperwork and a quiet erasure. Unsure, I called Tessa, my oldest friend from college, now a paralegal in Chicago. Smart and patient, and no stranger to family drama. She knew exactly what to look for: hidden clauses, odd sign-offs, legal loopholes meant to protect, but sometimes used to exclude. Within hours, Tessa found an old will, my father's original, tucked behind a newer set of legalese. There in faded ink was a clause naming me as a fallback beneficiary should the house's taxes or insurance ever lapse. I'd never heard a word about this from my mother, Grace, or Evan. I was stunned not just by the discovery, but by how easy it is to lose your place in a family story. Not through anger or argument, but through silence and subtlety. Tessa shared her own example. She'd seen families torn apart because one sibling knew the right attorney, or because a parent didn't want to have difficult conversations. In America, she said inheritance and legal rights aren't always about fairness. Too often, they're about who knows how to read between the lines. If you're not vigilant, you might wake up to find yourself erased, even while everyone swears you were never forgotten. What I learned from that search is simple but important. Trust in families and in life should always be backed up by transparency. It's easy to assume that love will protect us, or that family means forever. But documents matter, and understanding them is a way of loving yourself too. You have a right to ask questions, to read the fine print, to stand up for your place, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. That night, holding the old deed and the will, I understood that my next step would require courage. Not just to protect my memories, but to face my own family, and maybe even myself. It was time to decide, would I let things go, or would I finally claim what was meant for me? That night I sat in my quiet kitchen with a mug of tea growing cold between my hands, thinking about what the next move should be. The house on Willow Shore felt so far away, and yet closer than ever, almost within reach if I was willing to take it. There's a strange kind of crossroads that comes to anyone who's been hurt by family. Do you walk away for your own peace, or do you stand up and claim your place, risking more conflict? I wish there was a simple answer, but most of the time, there isn't. I thought about stories I'd heard from friends and colleagues over the years. One friend, Melissa, told me how she discovered her mother's will had been quietly rewritten, leaving her with nothing. She walked away, moved to Colorado, and rebuilt her life, but the wound never fully closed. Another, Dan, went to court against his siblings, spending years in legal battles that left everyone bitter and exhausted. It made me realize that there's no right way to respond to betrayal in families, only the way that allows you to sleep at night, knowing you honored your own truth. As I wrestled with my options, I considered what revenge would even look like. It would be easy, perhaps even satisfying for a moment, to win the house just to prove a point. But deep down, I knew I didn't want to become the villain in someone else's story. I didn't want the house to be a symbol of hurt or pettiness. At the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I simply let it go, I would be erasing not just my claim, but everything I'd ever meant to that place, and everything my father meant for me to remember. In the end, I made my choice for a simple reason. Sometimes you have to fight for yourself, not to hurt others, but to remind yourself that you belong. It's not about taking something away. It's about reclaiming a part of your story that someone tried to steal. There's a kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't just fade away. You stood up even if your voice shook. That's the kind of courage that changes everything, even if the world never notices. The lesson for me, and maybe for anyone listening, is that healing and justice aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is draw a line. You get to decide what you're willing to forgive and what you're willing to fight for. The decision is never easy, but it's always yours to make. With that clarity, I picked up the phone and called Tessa back. It was time to take the next step to protect what was rightfully mine and to prepare for whatever came next. Little did I know that choice would set in motion a series of events I never could have predicted. Starting a legal process against your own family is one of the loneliest feelings in the world. The day after calling Tessa, I found myself reading through old emails, digging up property records, and making appointments with a lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. There's something cold about legal language, the way it reduces family history to signatures and line items. But that's what it takes sometimes to stand up for yourself. I filled out forms, drafted statements, and signed my name with a shaky hand. Every step felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but I kept going anyway. Throughout the process, my siblings' reactions were colder than I expected. Evan sent a clipped text, "Why are you doing this?" Grace refused to pick up my calls. The first letter from their attorney arrived 2 days later, formal, almost cruel in its lack of warmth. It's hard to explain to outsiders how quickly love can turn to suspicion when property is involved. I remembered my coworker April, whose family stopped speaking to her after she challenged her father's will. She said, "No one tells you that the price of fairness is often paid in silence." Her words stayed with me. The legal side of things moved slowly but relentlessly. My lawyer explained the process, filing a formal claim, submitting evidence, then waiting for the other side to respond. Sometimes it felt less like a battle and more like an endurance test. Each document I submitted was a reminder that my worth wasn't just emotional, it was legal, tangible, and deserved. I learned how to read between the lines, to trust the paper trail over promises. My friend Mark once lost his family home because he ignored a single piece of mail. I didn't want to make that mistake. Through it all, I struggled with guilt. Was I being selfish? Was I betraying the very people I once tried so hard to please? On hard days, I remembered that choosing yourself isn't the same as choosing revenge. There's a difference between fighting for fairness and fighting out of spite. The lesson I took from this chapter is simple boundaries are not betrayals. You're allowed to defend what matters, even if others call it disloyalty. Fairness doesn't always look kind, but it is necessary. No one should have to disappear just to keep the peace. The legal battle wasn't just about paperwork or property, it was about claiming back my story. Each email, each meeting was a step toward taking up space I'd been pushed out of for years. But as the weeks wore on, the silence from my family grew heavier, and I realized the fight wasn't only in court, it was out in the world too. And sometimes when the world finds out, the battle gets even harder. I thought the hardest part would be facing my family, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly word spread beyond our four walls. The first hint came as a curious message from a high school friend: "Is everything okay with your folks?" Soon neighbors on Willowshore were whispering, and before long a local news site ran a short piece on our family dispute. It felt surreal reading my own story, flattened and dramatized on a screen for strangers to pick apart. The world loves a scandal, and sometimes the simplest version of a story is the one that sticks, whether or not it's true. Reputation can feel like quicksand. One moment you're the dependable daughter, the next you're painted as greedy or heartless. I remembered the story of my coworker Janelle, who inherited her grandfather's hardware store, only to be accused by relatives of stealing the family legacy. The neighborhood gossip turned her into a villain overnight. She told me the hardest part wasn't losing friends, it was doubting herself, wondering if she really was the bad guy people believed her to be. It's a lonely feeling, fighting not just for your rights, but for your name. For a while, I tried to control the narrative. I called a few people, gently explained my side, and sent clarifying emails. But rumors have their own momentum. Even with the facts, some people clung to the version that made the best story. I learned quickly that you can't reason someone out of a tale they want to believe. The same people who once celebrated my successes now hesitated to make eye contact at the grocery store. In our small town, privacy evaporates fast, and family business becomes everyone's business. The lesson I carried through this storm was simple but hard-earned. You can't please everyone, and you can't rewrite other people's scripts for you. Trying to win public approval is like chasing fog. Sometimes the best you can do is stand in your truth and let time do the healing. I leaned on Tessa, who reminded me, the only reputation you control is the one you have with yourself. It wasn't easy, but I stopped answering questions that weren't asked in good faith. I poured my energy back into the legal case and into holding on to who I was before the noise began. All the while, the real fight continued behind closed doors, in conference rooms and courthouse halls. The world could believe whatever it wanted, but the real test would come not from headlines, but from evidence and integrity. The date was set for court, and as the noise outside built to a fever pitch, I knew that soon I'd have to stand up in front of everyone and say at last what I'd waited years to say. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled faintly of floor wax and nerves. I arrived early, clutching a folder of documents, and the hope that truth would be enough. My brother and sister sat at the far end of the bench, faces unreadable, eyes fixed on their phones. Our mother wore her best pearls, looking both fragile and fierce. The judge called our case, and suddenly years of silence, resentment, and misunderstanding filled the room. In those moments, law felt colder than family ever had, but also strangely clarifying. Here, facts would matter more than feelings, at least for a little while. Standing before the judge, I felt small but steady. My lawyer presented the paper trail deeds, old wills, even Dad's handwritten note. I was grateful for every piece of proof, but nothing compared to hearing my father's voice on a short recording Tessa had found. His words were gentle, talking about the house, about wanting me to have a place to come home to, no matter what. There were no accusations, just hope. It's rare in legal disputes for intention to come through so clearly. For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for my father's memory. Across the aisle, my sibling's attorney tried to paint a different story, one of manipulation, confusion, and imagined betrayal. I watched my brother's jaw tighten, my sister's hands fidget in her lap. Family court isn't a place for easy truths. It's where everyone's pain rises to the surface. I remembered stories I'd read, siblings who never spoke again, families broken by court rulings. I realized that whatever happened, none of us would leave unchanged. In America, the law can restore property, but it can't repair trust. That's a truth every judge knows, and every family must learn for themselves. The judge's ruling was gentle, almost sad. He acknowledged the evidence and honored my father's wishes, granting me the deed. But he also spoke softly about the cost of silence, of wounds left to fester. His words stayed with me. This court enforces the law, but it cannot mend the heart. I left the courthouse not feeling triumphant, but lighter, as if a weight had finally been set down. Winning in this case meant something quieter: acknowledgement, a place in the story, and permission to let go of old hurt, if only for a moment. Walking out into the sunlight, I realized that while the legal battle was over, the real work was just beginning. Now it was time to return to Willowshore, not as a child on the outside, but as someone finally allowed to come home. What would it feel like to walk through those rooms again, to face the memories, and start the slow process of healing? That's the journey I want to share with you next. Returning to Willowshore alone was both familiar and strange. The house greeted me with the creak of floorboards and the salty breeze off the lake. For the first time, there were no voices echoing through the rooms, no suitcases stacked in the hallway. I moved slowly from space to space, running my hand along the banister, touching old photos, still hanging slightly crooked. The kitchen clock had stopped, but in every room I found traces of laughter and tears. The emptiness wasn't just absence, it was an invitation to start fresh, to remember what was good and forgive what hurt. Grief and relief mingled as I dusted shelves and opened windows wide. I discovered my childhood drawings in a desk drawer and a faded quilt in the guest room. Each item brought a flood of memory: Dad's whistle in the garden, Mom humming on rainy afternoons, my siblings and I chasing fireflies until dusk. Yet alongside every happy memory was a shadow. A holiday, missed a dinner, eaten in silence, a door quietly closed. Healing, I realized, doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means letting yourself feel it gently so it doesn't harden your heart for good. I thought about my friend Rosa, who inherited her grandmother's house after a family split. She once told me that she cleaned every window not just to chase away dust, but to clear the fog of resentment. You have to decide what you'll carry with you, she said, and what you'll finally put down. I tried to do the same, choosing which books to keep, which chipped mugs to give away, and which memories deserved a place in the sun. The house became lighter as I let go, one small act at a time. The lesson for me, and maybe for anyone who's had to start over, is this: a home can be a place of healing, but only if you allow yourself to make new memories there. You can honor the past without living in it. The rooms that once echoed with loneliness can become spaces of comfort and hope. All it takes is time, patience, and a willingness to believe that what was broken doesn't have to stay that way forever. It's the slow work of forgiveness for others and for yourself. As the sun set over Willowshore, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, feeling the weight of the journey behind me and the lightness of new beginnings ahead. The house was mine, not as a prize, but as a promise to myself that I would keep showing up, keep healing, and keep building a life that felt true. But this wasn't just my story. It belonged to everyone who's ever been written out and who's ever dared to come home again. Looking back, every step of this journey, from exclusion to discovery, from legal battles to healing, has been about more than a house on Willowshore. It's been about claiming my place in a story I was nearly written out of, and learning that belonging doesn't depend on anyone's permission but my own. The pain of being overlooked, the courage it took to stand up for myself, and the quiet work of forgiveness have all shaped me into someone stronger and more at peace than I ever expected. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or anywhere else in life, you know how loneliness can echo louder than any argument. But you also know the power of taking the first step, whether that means speaking up, asking for help, or simply refusing to let your story end in silence. I found comfort in small acts, opening the windows, clearing away old dust, and inviting light back into spaces I thought would never feel warm again. It's these small choices repeated that create the real foundation of home. I realized too that my story isn't unique. So many of us have lived through similar heartbreak inheritance battles, family estrangement, or just the quiet pain of being misunderstood. But there's a strange and beautiful strength that grows when we share those stories out loud. It's in the way neighbors show up, friends check in, and strangers online become allies. The more we talk about what hurts, the less power it has to keep us apart. Community isn't just where you're born, it's where you're seen, heard, and believed. So if you're watching this and carrying your own story of loss or being left out, know this: you are not alone. There is always a path back to yourself, no matter how long it takes or how winding the road. Don't be afraid to claim your space, to fight for what matters, and to trust that healing is possible. Sometimes the family you find along the way can be just as powerful as the one you were born into. Your voice matters, your story matters, and the world needs to hear it. If this video spoke to something in you, if you saw even a little of yourself in my journey, I hope you'll take a moment to let me know. Share your own experience in the comments, or just leave a single word if that's all you have. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that silence doesn't get the final word. We read every message, and together we can make sure no one has to come home alone.